Hey HubSpot team, this is Tyler from Census. I'm the partner manager here, and I'm going to show you a demo of syncing data from a data warehouse into HubSpot in a matter of minutes using reverse ETL. So there's essentially 4 steps involved in creating a sync in the Census UI. The first step would be adding a data source connection. You'll see here that we support most of the popular cloud data warehouses and databases on the market today. In this case, we're going to demo Snowflake and sync that into HubSpot. A quick note on warehouse access permissions is that Census will ask for read and write access to the data warehouse for 2 reasons. The first reason being a security standpoint. So Census will create a bookkeeping schema within the data warehouse and only store that bookkeeping schema within that data warehouse and not the Census platform itself, making it secure by default because there's 0 data storage at rest. In addition to that, from a performance standpoint, we're going to run a full sync once a sync is triggered in the Census UI. And then we're going to take a snapshot of that bookkeeping schema and compare that to subsequent snapshots, depending on how frequent the sync is running, and only incrementally sync over the differences between those snapshots to be as efficient as possible when making API calls to HubSpot. And then in this case, we're going to add HubSpot as a data service using OAuth, which is typically how most of our SaaS applications connect to Census. The third piece is going to be the modeling layer, where we define the data in Snowflake that we want to sync over to HubSpot. And we have 3 means of doing so. We can run arbitrary SQL right in the Census UI and preview that using this button here. We can also pull on existing DBT projects or use looker looks as a means of modeling. In this case, I've created data models to sync over companies to HubSpot, contacts associated with those companies, and then finally custom behavioral events associated with those contacts. So in a matter of 10 minutes, we're going to take this relatively empty HubSpot instance and populate it with companies, contacts, custom behavioral events. So let's get started doing that by going into the Syncs tab here. In this case, I have a company sync ready to go. I'm going to kick that off. And while that runs, I'm going to walk you through syncing over the contacts associated with those companies. So we'll go here to create a sync. Our connection will be Snowflake. We're going to pull on the contact sync model that I've created using SQL to associate these contacts with the companies that are populating into HubSpot now. We're going to sync data, obviously, to HubSpot and to the company object. This is going to specify the sync behavior. So in this case, we're going to choose to update or create, which means that we're going to update existing destination records in HubSpot when those IDs between the source and destination match, or otherwise create new ones if they're missing. So to that point, how are the source and destination records matched? They're matched using a unique identifier. In this case, we're going to map over email to the email contact object. And then we're going to go down to field mappings here. In this case, we're going to simply map over first and last name for contacts. You could run a test if you wanted to, but I know that this is going to work, so I'm just going to go ahead and click next. I'm going to run sync now. While that's populating HubSpot with contacts now, I'll overview a few of these tabs. In the configuration tab here, if we scroll down, we can click edit. This is useful if you want to add in, let's say, a new field mapping after the fact and don't want to create a sync from scratch. You can do so there. As I alluded to, there's different ways to schedule syncs to kick off. You can see our scheduling options here from manual all the way to continuous, where we're pinging Snowflake every 90 to 120 seconds to monitor for any changes in the source that we can incrementally sync over to HubSpot. You can also do cron scheduling for any unique scheduling needs for your prospects or customers, and update that all here. Here is the sync history tab, which will show the source records that land in the destination and are updated or rejected. If they are rejected, which I will purposely reject one record here, you'll see in a little bit, you can click into why that was rejected. In this tab, you can see any user activity on the Census workspace. So you can see that I kicked off a sync here on August 15th at 6:06 p.m. Let's say if another user kicked off a sync or paused one of your syncs, you'd be able to see all of that information here. In the Alerts tab, we can see all of the custom alerting settings that you can filter here in the Census UI. And then finally, we have our API inspector, where we can see the real-time API calls that Census is making for real-time observability needs. Go back to the overview, and awesome. It looks like about 4,309 records were updated in HubSpot, and one was rejected. As I mentioned, you'd be able to click into that rejected record. Awesome. So we'll go back to HubSpot, make sure those contacts populated, and looks like they are there. Nice. Cool. Now we'll kick off the custom behavioral event sync. So we'll go back to our syncs tab, create a new sync. This time we're going to sync over about 100 events to HubSpot just for the purpose of this demo. We're going to connect to HubSpot again. This time we're going to connect to the custom behavioral event object. I will note here that all of our HubSpot docs live at docs.getcensus.com/destinations/HubSpot. I will note also that there's a little bit of prep work involved with custom behavioral events in particular. You can read about that here. Going back to the sync UI, we're going to use the append behavior to append every new record in the source to the destination. In this case, we're going to map over we're going to identify using the event ID. We're going to update specific properties. And then finally, we're going to go down to the mapping fields here. We're going to choose the HubSpot event name. We're going to map over the timestamp. And finally, the contact, which we're going to look up by those emails. We're going to choose to backfill all records, meaning that the first sync run will send over all records in the current Snowflake data, and Census will also sync new records going forward from there. We're going to click the next. We're going to go ahead and run that sync. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. This should take about 2 minutes to run this sync in particular. All right, so it looks like our sync completed and about 100 records were updated in HubSpot. 0 were rejected. So now I'm going to go into the model that we used to see which contacts in particular were updated. So it looks like Arlene was a contact that was updated. So I'll go back to HubSpot, make sure that the custom behavioral event is showing on the Arlene contact object. Awesome, and you can see that custom behavioral event here of recipe favorited by Arlene. So in this 10-minute or so demo, we've used Census to sync over companies, contacts associated with those companies, and then custom behavioral events associated with those contacts, and took a relatively empty HubSpot instance and enriched it with tons and tons of data using reverse ETL. Thanks, everyone.